Have you found that you are finding yourself frustrated with certain people in your life? Are you finding it hard to speak up when you should? What is that about? We will look into the nature of boundaries, how to set limits, because you probably need to. Next on Journey to Healing.
Welcome to Journey to Healing. Do you find yourself discouraged, troubled, in need of healing, but not sure where to turn? John Euler, a licensed professional counselor, is here to help. John has more than 25 years of professional experience helping people deal with the issues that keep them emotionally and spiritually stuck. There is help. There is hope. There is a God who loves you and wants to help you find peace and strength. And John Euler is here to help you find that on this edition of Journey to Healing.
Hello everyone, my name is John Euler. This is Journey to Healing. We are doing a deep dive into the issue of boundaries tonight. That falls within the overall rubric of grief and loss. If you haven't been with us, you might be wondering, well, what do boundaries have to do with grief and loss? In brief, unless your boundaries are as they should be, then you will never be able to be about the business of healing, because things in the present or in the current day will probably be stirred up, or things are continuing to create challenges for you so that it can never get calm enough to begin to heal the past. So we are in the midst of a series on grief and loss, dealing now with those people that have been challenging. We have looked at a number of aspects of those kinds of people, and we have used the term that Jesus in the New Testament used. He used the term pigs for people who will take that which is important to us, that which is valuable. They will take our pearls. Jesus in Matthew chapter 7, verse 6 said, "Do not take what is important or holy and give it to dogs." So we looked at that. And do not take your pearls and give them or cast them to swine, to pigs. And so we looked at what is a pig. As a matter of fact, if you want to go back and look at previous broadcasts, you can find those on SurvivorSupport.net under podcasts. And we've done a deep dive into some of those issues. We're now looking at the issue of boundaries. Again, why are boundaries important? Because without having proper boundaries, you are never going to be able to find that you have the right to your own self, your own personhood. I'm adjusting the volume here. Just want to make sure there we go. So we're looking at the issue of boundaries. We're looking at how do you know if you are entitled to have boundaries. So I would recommend that you go back and look at some of the previous podcasts. So I'm not taking any questions tonight, simply because there's a lot of content. We will be doing a question and answer program in a few weeks. If you would like to submit some questions, you can do so either under each of the podcasts. There's a section there to submit questions or make comments, or you can go directly to SurvivorSupport.net, submit some questions, and we will be collecting those, and we will answer some of those questions live on air. So I want to take a step back and again review, what are boundaries? If boundaries are important to establish, what are they? Because without boundaries, those extremely selfish people, those manipulators in your life, will continue to do what they have always done. Again, the definition of insanity, according to AA, is what? And it's a good definition, it just doesn't require AA. What is the definition of insanity? It is doing the same thing time and time again and expecting a different outcome, hoping it will be different. Well, that's one thing if it has to do with just you, but if it has to do with another person in your life, you can't control another person, And therefore, as you are doing what you are trying to do, the question is, are they going to get with the program? Are they going to cooperate? Someone who is reasonable has a conscience, and they care about having a conscience. Those that are selfish, the more selfish they become, the less they care. The less they care about their conscience, and therefore the less they care about you. The less they care about impacting you, the less they care about the impact their actions and choices and decisions have on you, and the less they feel sorry. So without a conscience, you will have no remorse and no empathy. And that, by the way, is the working definition of a white-collar psychopath, including the other kinds that we think of. So in order to ensure that you are not going against the scriptural mandate of what Jesus said, not cast your pearls before swine, Peter, in the last verse of 2 Peter chapter 2, used the exact same term. Paul references the term fool. That is not like the modern day rendering of fool, but fool and pig and dog are the exact same thing. It's someone who is morphed into a profoundly selfish, profoundly adept, an adept manipulator. So these are not people we should be around. And Solomon himself said that if you try to rescue a pig, okay, we're not calling names, we're just assessing. But if you try to rescue a pig and you clean him up, or her, meaning you're taking the time, effort, and energy to do that, they're going to go back the way they were. Why? Because you can put lipstick on a pig, but what is it? So, a rose by any other name. So it's serious. Okay, so we need to implement boundaries. Boundaries are things that separate things of importance. You have to believe you are important. You have to believe there's a scriptural mandate, as it were, a mandate from heaven to do this. If you don't really believe that, you will never be able to do that. If someone has told you that it is godly to be nice, and we covered that in a previous podcast, if someone has conveyed myths in the form of almost scripture, then you will find yourself unable to follow through because you will feel guilty. And that actually is false guilt. There's a difference between genuine guilt and false guilt. In brief, and false guilt, by the way, is shame. So there's a difference between having true guilt or being shame-based, and the difference is this. Guilt is tied to something you've done. Therefore, you can do something about it. Shame is the result of false guilt, and that's why you can't get it off of you. It wasn't yours to begin with, and therefore you can't do enough to get rid of shame. Shame is actually somebody else taking their responsibility and placing it on you. So the best thing you can do with shame is give it up. Now, easier said than done, but really it is important to understand the difference. The key thing within us, and we'll talk about it a little bit more here in a moment, is intuition. Every manipulator will go after, they will target your intuition. Why? Because if they are not willing to honor their conscience, meaning if they don't care enough, then they will not stop themselves, meaning their conscience won't be enough to stop them. Right? If my conscience bothers me, I'm going to back up. Why? Because ideally, I value someone else. But if I don't care enough about someone else, then at least I don't want to be bothered by my conscience. So some people will actually do the right thing, maybe a little bit for lesser reasons, but that's still okay. It keeps them on their side of the fence. But ideally, somebody cares enough about another person that they will manage and dial back their own behavior. They'll act with self-control. That actually is an indicator of true character growth, that I have a higher value than myself. But for those that aren't quite there, but they should be, that should be the goal, then the next level of maturity is that they don't want to do something wrong because it bothers them. It's better than nothing, and that's still okay. but that'll still stop them, so they won't keep doing what they do. But if they get to a point where they don't necessarily care about you as much as they should, and they don't really care about the pain, because now the benefit of whatever it is they want, whatever it is you have, what you represent to them, that begins to become greater than their own pain as far as the conscience. So they will start ignoring their conscience. They will turn the volume down on their conscience. It'll stop bothering them, not by accident. As a matter of fact, in my background, clinically, I spent a little over 11 years on psychology staff in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, and I studied this dynamic. And I am firmly convinced, and at some point in time I will write about it, but I'm firmly convinced that psychopaths are not, it's neither nature nor nurture, but of course there's genetic components, could be. But you can have two twins, one turns out a psychopath and the other doesn't. Okay, it's really not nurture or nature, though those play a part. It is choice, meaning it is a violation, a conscious violation of conscience over a long period of time. Romans chapter 1 calls that a reprobate mind. So if you take someone who's overridden their conscience, and then you add other things on top of it, such as sexual deviance, nowadays always starts with porn, you will have a sexual psychopath. So the fancy term psychopath is simply a modern way of viewing the old-fashioned 3,000 years ago term of fool. The fool has said in his heart there is no God. What happens when somebody reaches that point where they don't fear having to give an account to someone? Then they become the sole arbiter of what they will or won't do. So their conscience is no longer working. Well, what's the only thing left to stop them then? It's going to have to be you. It's going to have to be you and your fence, you and your property line that's going to need some sort of, not just it depends, depending upon the kind of person you're dealing with, and that's what we're going to look at. You'd better know the kind of person you're dealing with, because if they are not going to stop themselves, then it has to be up to you. And now the question is, what kind of barrier, as it were, what kind of limits do you need to bring to bear to ensure that what is important to you, including yourself, your time, effort, energy, resources, everything about you, your opinions, your preferences, your voice, your personal power, as it were, what's to stop them from taking that which is important? It better be you. It has to be limits, and they have to match. So we're going to review just for a moment. We're going to look at what are boundaries. Boundaries are what we speak of when it comes to the need to set limits. So those are synonymous, really. Boundaries vary depending upon the situation and the person with whom you're dealing. We have to have discernment. That's why a manipulator will go after your intuition. They will cause you to turn the volume down on your intuition. They can't do it for you. You actually have to cooperate in that endeavor. So they'll begin to make sure that you cannot figure it out. You can't be sure and certain. They will cause you to begin to question yourself. The moment they do that, and the moment they are able to accomplish that, and it happens little by little, they're on their way. And they know that you will now help them on to their goal. And oftentimes their goal is you. So you're going to help them on to you in a couple different ways, probably. Boundaries are something that most of us understand conceptually, but we have a hard time defining. So again, boundaries denote something of value. You are valuable. You have to believe that. God says you are. That's why the thou shalt nots. Thou shalt not steal. Why should I not take something that is of yours? Because it's yours. We hold these truths to be no-brainers, self-evident, that All men are created, that's a theological statement, all men are created equal and endowed or granted or gifted by their Creator with certain unchangeable rights. So you matter, and you have to believe it. They indicate something is worthy of being protected from being negatively impacted. So you have the right to be protected from somebody negatively impacting you or damaging you. Okay. Boundaries presuppose authority and ownership. Who are you to say I can't have what you have? Whether your time, effort, energy, resources, your money, it's part of your resources. How about your body? Why can't I encroach upon your body? Because it's yours. Who says? God says. So that's a pretty good place to start right there. So that ends the argument. Okay, they are based upon self-evident truths. They are implemented without apology or without needing somebody else's permission. And that's key. If you need somebody else's permission to establish boundaries, probably the person that you're looking for permission is who? Is the selfish person. Well, they have a vested interest in ensuring that you can't and you don't implement boundaries. So how do you think that's going to go? Right? You can continue to solicit their cooperation. It ain't going to work. Right? Boundaries separate one thing from another, and they are within your right to implement them. They must be established if you are to ensure that you are being a good steward. Many Christians are told that the highest virtue is being nice, and that has nothing to do with Christian virtue. The highest Christian virtue, basically, I think this is safe to say, is discernment. That's why in the book of Proverbs it opens, chapter 1 and chapter 2, if we pray for wisdom, and wisdom typically has to do with how we're interacting with someone else. If you were on a tropical island, if you crash landed on a tropical island, would you ever have to pray for wisdom? I'd say I don't think so. You'd pray for being rescued. You'd pray for strength. You'd pray for peace. I don't think you pray for wisdom. Why? Because wisdom presupposes other people are in our life, and therefore we want to do what is right, just, and fair. So to the extent that I have somebody in my life, I need to discern. So that's probably the most important of all virtues, the ability to discern. It allows me then to ensure that people are treated properly, including us. And boundaries are up to you. You decide, you choose, and you determine what kind of boundaries and how long. And that's where it gets difficult for those that have had their boundaries overridden for a long period of time or grew up in a home where they were given the message that they were not able to have their boundaries. Okay. They must be established if you were to be a good steward. We already talked about that. And they must be clear and must be maintained if you are to protect yourself and those you're responsible for and what needs to be protected. Okay, so if you are a parent, you need to be able to have boundaries because there's a lot on the line. What are the purpose of boundaries? The purpose of the boundaries are to reflect reality, meaning if someone is starting to become selfish, if someone is starting to encroach upon another person's boundaries, then they need to know that. Why? Because that means, and it presupposes, they're not listening to their conscience. Now, nobody's perfect, and we're not talking about the minor infractions of life. We covered that on the podcast, How Big of a Pig? Okay, this is on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of selfishness. We are all at level 1. Ideally, we're going to be at level 1 less often, but that is the challenge of life, to become more mature and less selfish. So we all fluctuate between 0, which is being on the path, and level 1. If I start to become selfish, then I move from level 1 to level 2. Level 2 means I'm now beginning to justify and rationalize. And I'm slow at the uptake, meaning I am not responding very quickly. It's become clear that by the time someone morphs from like half to one in that one category, by the time we get to 1.9, and now I'm inching to 2, the 2 category, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, I've already gotten enough feedback. I've gotten enough feedback in the form of facial expressions, body language. I can see it in somebody's eyes. Right? If eyes are the window of the soul, then I can see that little by little I am taxing that person. It is not rocket science. Usually most of us understand this immediately. Right? Let's say we're not as patient as we needed to be and we walk out of the house. You mean to tell me you can't discern the shape in which you left that house, meaning the atmosphere? So if you have somebody in your home and you leave for work, and if they're up or around, are they going to miss you? Or is it kind of a relief not to have you around? When you arrive back home, if you could see inside that house, are people excited, gathering at the window, waving at you, or are they scurrying around, making sure that everything is okay, lest what happens when you step through the door? Are you Mr. Thoughtful? Are you Miss Positive? We all should be. Or is it all about us? And therefore, as we come through the door, now the king is home, the queen is home. And if it's not to our liking, they're going to hear about it. Now, that's different than if people in the home, let's say if they are starting to become selfish. Now we need to begin to implement boundaries with them. Okay, but insofar as it has to do with us, how are we doing? So if I start to allow myself to become selfish, then if nobody reflects that to me, and how's that going to be reflected? Communication. First, it's body language. If that's not enough, then at some point in time, somebody needs to begin to inquire, such as, hey, I'm wondering, right? It doesn't mean that we take a baseball bat and get their attention. Okay, that would be inappropriate. But we match our response, our inquiry, our reflecting to the level they're at. So does it require a conversation with every single thing? Not really. Because if you're dealing with somebody with a conscience, then their conscience will be their guide. And if they're a Christian, if they have a relationship with God, God will be communicating with them. Not necessarily in a harsh way, but let's say stuff is happening, frustrations have built, and so now the spouse, the parent, goes off to work. Let's say it hasn't been a pleasant morning. So now I'm driving to work. I may have a few moments to myself. Guess what's going to be happening? If I left in a way that was not encouraging, right? We're either pouring courage into someone or we're sucking courage out. If it's not life-building and life-giving, then I am taking life, meaning little by little I'm chipping away at them. I'm standing on their oxygen tube. So if I'm not an asset, then I'm a detriment. Do I notice? I'd better notice, because if I don't notice, then I'm either brain dead, I'm clueless, or guess what's happening? I've been cutting myself some slack and saying, no, it doesn't really matter. Really? Read Matthew chapter 5, where he says, if you're at the altar presenting your gift and you suddenly remember you were a jerk, okay, that's my translation. You suddenly remember that somebody has been injured by you. Somebody has something against you, meaning you've done something, not that they're sitting there seething, but you've negatively impacted somebody. What's he say to do? Stop playing religion. That's what he says. He says, shut your mouth. Go make it right. In humility and contrition, evidencing 1 John 1:9, which simply says this, if we confess our sins, the Greek word for confess says to say the exact same thing as. So I need to go, and I need to make it right. I need it to be real, I'm not going to rationalize or justify. I'm going to help it make sense. I'm going to go back to the person, ideally maybe at lunchtime, maybe even before that. I'm going to get on the phone. And what am I going to do? I'm going to apologize. I'm going to help clarify that it wasn't their issue. I'm going to be working on, there's the missing piece, right, for a lot of people. If I am doing something, then it's time. It's time I begin to stop doing that kind of thing. Okay? It's time to grow up. It's time to force myself to move beyond my comfort zone. Selfishness is, quite frankly, a wonderful comfort zone. As a matter of fact, I was thinking about the phrase, you know what, I don't want to have kids because I'm just too selfish. Now, I'm not suggesting somebody go out and have kids, but that idea that, well, I just don't want to do that, I'm too selfish. Okay. And, well, that's not who I am. No, who you are is a pig. No, who you are has become somebody who has decided to somehow cut yourself some slack, because you're probably like that around people. But you have decided that somehow you can grant yourself permission to be, by degree, a selfish pig. So guess what? You get to stop. You get to make a change. You get to stop making people's lives miserable. You get to stop being a negative person. You get to stop giving yourself permission to spew, or to make it tense in the room, or to make people walk on eggshells. Well, but you don't. You're right, I don't understand. Well, let me ask you the question. Is there ever a reason not to do the right thing? Because we're called to do what is right, just, and fair. According to 3,000-year-old Proverbs, is it ever acceptable to give yourself permission to not do the right thing? No, it's not. How about just? Is it ever right to be unjust? Nope. How about unfair? Is it ever right to be unfair? Well, who can do this perfectly? I'm not suggesting that. What I'm saying, though, the standard is high. So it's time for growth. And that's really what Journey to Healing is all about. You're not responsible for what happened to you. A lot of people have gone through a lot of serious things. But instead of taking care of it where it belongs, what do? They just take it into the next generation. They take it into their next relationship. Now, it doesn't have to be big stuff. It can actually be small stuff. And oftentimes, as I'm queuing it up, oftentimes it's going to be little stuff that creates what is called a love-hate relationship. Some of you have these in your life. You shouldn't. Meaning, it's not okay to allow a relationship to stay dysfunctional. That doesn't help you. So the only reason a relationship stays dysfunctional is because somebody's permitting it. You have a selfish person and then another person that's permitting it. Now, both can be selfish. Well, guess what? Then they need to work on that. The only thing you can work on is what you have control over, which is you and your attitude. So oftentimes, you have people that are tolerating stuff, and they think that's what families do. You say, well, you can choose your family, but you can't choose your friends. That's not what the Lord says. He says he didn't necessarily come to bring peace, but a sword. Doesn't mean, right? To separate people. Now, why would he do that? It's religiously, sometimes that happens, of course, but it's the issue of truth. He doesn't want families that just bump along in irritation. He wants us to spur one another on to love and good works. But how many people have put up with selfishness in the home, and then it sort of just becomes, well, that's the way we are. Really? Maybe this will sound familiar, and this is not what we want.
I don't want an elaborate funeral, Eunice.
Oh, Mama, don't.
You just slip me in quietly here between Daddy and Rose Chang.
Mama, don't. You know how that upsets me when you talk like that. That's a long way off, Mama. Come on now. I had a real nice day planned for both of us. Come on, let's go to the movie.
A nice day for you, maybe. It's always some movie you want to see. Now, don't you want to say a little something to your father in private?
No. I've been talking to him in my head.
Well, I hope you've been saying a prayer. I don't know what kind of prayers you say these days. Wouldn't ever hurt you to show up at church once in a while.
All right, Mama, we'll talk about that some other time, too. Come on.
Well, at least say a little prayer out loud so he won't know how much you've slept.
Mama, I told you I've been saying a prayer to him in my head, and I know he heard it.
Well, say a little something out loud. You hardly ever come out here. Say anything. Say hello. Fine, Carl. We can't talk any longer because your daughter's got to rush off to some silly movie.
Now, wait just a minute. I wanted to go to this movie alone, but you kept moaning and groaning and whining about sitting at home staring at them four walls, so I said, okay, Mama. I'll treat you to lunch and I'll treat you to the movie. And then what do? You proceed to drag me out here to this creepy cemetery where you make a total... jackass out of yourself! And this movie is important to me. It happens to be a Barbra Streisand musical.
Oh, well, she won't take me anywhere I want to go. So when I finally do get out, it's to sit through 2 hours of that silly Barbra Streisand, and who the hell ever told her she could sing anyway?
Let's see there. How many can relate to that? Right? That's almost the typical family. Welcome to Thanksgiving. Welcome to the Christmas table. We are not called to have relationships like that. That's a whacked out relationship where it goes back and forth for how many years? How many years is that like that? So that relationship needs boundaries. It may just take a few boundaries, but it's certainly, meaning a little more minor boundaries, but it's certainly going to need some, because if one of those two, Carol Burnett or Vicki Lawrence from the old Carol Burnett show, if one of them doesn't have boundaries, then what's going to happen? How long is it going to stay like that? And what happens if kids come into the picture? What do they see? What are they being taught about problem solving, about communication skills, about conflict resolution? They're being taught that that's okay, that all you can expect during each day or each weekend or on a Sunday is it's only a matter of time till the other shoe drops. And that is the makings for a lot of compulsive behavior in the next generation. We will continue looking at more about boundaries, and we're going to see a few more serious examples on the other side of the break.
Are you or someone you know a survivor of abuse and wondering where to turn for trustworthy help and insight into the effects of such abuse? Ever wish you had access to a resource that could help you continue your progress in healing? SurvivorSupport.net is that resource. Developed by John Euler, a seasoned therapist with years of experience working with sexual abuse survivors, SurvivorSupport.net is a one-of-a-kind resource to help you understand the impact of abuse and to help you understand the nature of those who harmed you in order to help you gain clarity and continue healing. If you are interested in speaking with John Euler about your situation or in having John conduct a consultation or a training for your church or organization, SurvivorSupport.net serves as a convenient method of contacting him. Our program, Journey to Healing, is made possible through the generous donations of viewers like you. There are many opportunities and needs that Survivor Support is attempting to meet, and your monthly support or one-time gift would be extremely helpful as we seek to meet those needs and opportunities. Simply visit SurvivorSupport.net and you will see the link to donate on the homepage. We thank you.